Is that what we're supposed to do? Oh, wow. Okay.
My mic is
Is it not working?
on. Is it?
There's a little. There's like numbers on there
I
that'll
thought
be.
I thought we would have somebody actually asking us questions and stuff.
I'll ask you questions.
No, see the
Both
thing
take
is though,
turns.
is I didn't get to read you guys' stuff because I'm writing my and then and I didn't. If I would have known this, I would have been beating the fucking pavement trying to read it. You know what I'm saying? Because I didn't know that
We
were
can
gonna just be
we can
sitting here.
talk about writing
We can
process
talk about
in general.
Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah, this was a setup for me though. Yeah, I'm a little. Yeah, okay. Lead and I'll follow really, really, really well. I'll try.
We can talk about origin stories. How our books began. We can talk about
That's a
our
good one.
writing process, like how you actually came to write the book that you wrote.
You want to
and-
lead? I can go.
Sure.
I can go
Uh,
first if you want.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you
Um,
start? Yeah.
I'll start by saying I'm not the kind of writer who wants to be a writer. I don't like it. I don't, promote it. I don't do anything with it. I never really wanted to really take it seriously, but I kept doing it because I kept circling back to it, and so Stay Raised Garden kind of came about over the course of maybe about 8 or 9 years. And in that process, I was trying to do every other fucking thing I could other than be a writer. So that's how I'll lead with that so that you guys can know that I am, as a friend of mine named Kelvin Elliott calls me, the reluctant writer. That's pretty much me.
That seems like a much healthier way to live your life, though.
Really?
Than trying to be a writer. I don't know if you agree.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a follow-up to that, do you only write when something calls to you, or is that?
It better be calling me on
Yeah.
three-way or something, because I mean I don't touch it unless I just can't get away from it, because it's grueling for me. The time it takes, the emotion it takes out of me. You don't have a life. At least I don't when I'm doing it. I don't have a life. Everybody was wondering where you disappeared to and stuff like that, and they don't understand, and they don't take it seriously until they Google your name or something like that, and then you're like, oh, okay, you really do this. So,
Yeah, I think with a novel, as someone who has not really written very many short stories, but like has written several novels, it is just like all consuming. Even when you're not
Yeah.
working on it, you're thinking about it. You decline everything else. Like you lock yourself in a room with it. You feel terrible for most of the time. And then there's like those brief moments of like total elation.
yeah, brief.
And then you publish and that feels bad too. So
It's almost like a letdown a little bit.
yeah.
You almost, because you go through so much to get to that point. And when you get there, you're like, where's the rest of it?
I feel like your book
We're
just
waiting
came
for-
out. We're like, it
Yeah,
feels so bad.
I want to hear your perspective on that, because your book just came out, right?
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago. I started working on that book in 2015, and it took me 7 years to put it together. I mean, that's the thing with stories, right? They take a long time, and what is it, that thing that they say about short stories, that they need to be like diamonds or something, perfectly cut?
That's what the agents say, man.
Yeah.
Fuck them, though. Like for real. That's just me.
I wasn't much of a reader or a writer growing up. I did read. I had this phase where all I did was read dead Germans, like Marx and Schopenhauer, Nietzsche. But other than that, I wasn't really like a fiction person. I think after I moved to this country, I felt very lonely. I was away from all of my family, my friends, and I felt like I had lost a part of myself, and partly that's partly the process of immigration itself, of having to speak in a language that's not entirely yours. I don't mean just the literal language of English, but also the gestures and the way you move as a person in the world.
Your book primarily focuses on immigration?
A lot of it, yes.
Okay. The actual process of being in the States, or the immigration, the E part of coming over here, is that part of the journey?
That's definitely part of it.
Okay.
But I think also, superficially, I think it's about immigration and the experience of Indians within India, and also like in the Indian diaspora, but on a deeper level, I think it's about yearning. It's about wanting to create a home for yourself, where a home that you've never really had, but you're trying to create one so you can put all of your feelings in it.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Is it your experience?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not entirely. I mean, it's fictional, but definitely, I think anyone who reads the book and who knows me, I guess, will see similarities.
Who are you influenced by?
So that's the thing about influence. I didn't set out to respond to an existing idea. Because I didn't come from an active sort of reading fiction standpoint, my goal at the time was to create these vessels of feeling, and so it was purely a self-preservation act. The poet Ilya Kaminsky once said, I think he said this in the poem. The poem is called Joseph Brodsky is Dead. In plain speech, for sweetness between the lines is no longer important. What you call immigration, I call suicide.
I'm familiar with him, so I can.
Yeah.
I see that. I see the poetry in it.
Yeah.
Julia, I wanted to ask you though, because that's a question. Who are you influenced by?
Oh gosh, I feel like for every book, something slightly different. But Angela Carter a lot, Shirley Jackson. In this, my most recent book, Olivia Rodrigo, the musician.
I did not know this person. Oh, really?
Yeah. Her album came out like midway while I was writing this book, and it's a book about like very sort of almost feral teenage girls. So I was like, oh, here we go. I can tap into that. But yeah, I feel like each book has been its own sort of little culmination of influences.
Did it take you a long time on this last one?
This one I started.
I asked that question. That's a simple question. Are they coming to you faster as you're going?
This one did. Although I think part of that was because I published my first book in 2018, and that I had started. That was like a 5 or 6 year process, I think, from like the initial idea, and then my second one I wrote fairly soon after that. I had a baby in between though, and I spent like 10 months holding him while he napped, thinking about what this book was going to be. And then when he finally would nap in the crib, then I was like, I'm gonna write this book. And so that one went like, the draft came quickly, and then it was a lot of editing, and it took a lot of revision. And this one was a pandemic book, and I had started it in, I think, like December 2019. And then I put it on pause for a good year and a half, had another baby, was not in a mental space to work on it, but was sort of, again, like percolating. Yeah. And it ended up, the drafting, this was like the fastest it had been, but I did like a year and a half of research before I even started writing. So that also could be part of it. I don't know. But now I'm in a place where like I have nothing. So I don't know that I can turn it around that quickly again.
And in saying that you feel like you have nothing, is that what makes you like desperate to start writing again?
I almost wish that I felt like I could write a good short story, because it's like it's a commitment, but it's a different kind of commitment. Like I feel like you can set it aside and work on other things and not put all your eggs in one basket. But with a novel, it feels so much like you need to commit to the idea, and it's scary to do that. And unless you have like sort of a driving, like something that is like really like, oh my gosh, I found the kernel of this book, it's very hard to say like this is my next thing. And so like I'm at a point where I've got like all these different ideas, and none of them feel like worthy of, like you said, sort of giving up my life for 6 months to draft. So we'll see where it goes. We'll see. I also, my book came out, Madeline in the Dark came out beginning of June, so I'm still sort of in it.
Yeah. And novels tend to do that, right? I mean, they take everything we have.
It's a lot, yeah. And yet, I'm still want to keep doing it.
I'm working on one right
Yeah.
now. And
I always kind of struggle with that couplet of short story. I am one of the people that believes that 99% of the novels that are written should be short stories, because I think everybody that I see is wasting pages. I believe in the most lean writing that you could get to. My work, if you look at it, you could I was naive when I signed my contract. I did not know the rights that I really had, and I had shitty representation, right? So I didn't know what I could do, and every time I see my cover, I always think, I hate that word on there, stories. I see it, but I've learned to embrace it, because all of the barriers that everyone told me that I wouldn't beat because it was in that format, I beat them. So now I'm like, okay, should I embrace this thing? You know, because if you read my book, you could, if you just take the titles off, there's no story to it. It just reads like a novel, you know.
I was really surprised about that. I was interested in. I really wanted to ask you that, like, why you decided to call it stories when
Okay,
it
so
seemed.
And the answer is you didn't?
Oh, you read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a mistake on my. That's a lie. It's not a mistake, but it's something that I do battle with, and because, you know, like the powerful people in New York and all those idiots, they you know, no, seriously, they control, you know, this market, and they're saying we can't sell something unless it looks this way, unless these certain people are on the cover or whatever the case may be, as opposed to just saying, let's find the best people writing and let's keep going, you know. But that's not the point. It's about it's a business, and we're trying to make money, and so that's kind of, you know, something that I thought. So when you said it, it's like, okay, so it's almost like you're saying, yeah, I see that too.
I see the somewhat opposite trend these days, where you got linked collections, short story collections, and there's this label they just say it's a novel, or, you know, but it's really a linked collection. Like, so I'm always curious, like, how do you define it? How do you say it? This is a linked collection and this is a novel. Do you ever struggle with that?
No.
Okay.
I don't. But I don't really subscribe to the boxes too much either. So, you know, I even in just you posing that question to me, I guess there's a little bit of liberation in that for me. But you can tell the difference, though. You can tell it. You know what I mean? You can tell when it's a loose connection, and the actors and characters in the work are kind of, you know, you can look at it, tell you're experienced. Now you guys can read through that bullshit. You could see, okay, this is stories, and they, you know, because they're trying to market it and sell it. They force the writer to edit it to this direction. You can read it. We know we got the experience, so you can see what was done to the book to make it that, because you know that the first version of it probably wasn't that, and the writer submitted these stories, and they said, hey, connect these some kind of way, or you know, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think also sort of not quite the same, but on a similar line of having things like, recently, I feel like some novels have come out that are slightly shorter, but I agree with you in that a lot of books, like, it could be 90 pages and it would be wonderful, but because there's no market for that, which, like, again, from a business perspective makes sense, because you have to print it and you have to justify the cost of someone buying it, you know. But I feel like I've read a lot of novels where it is just a novella or a long short story. And I think my favorite of any sort of genre is, like, something that really leans into what it is. Like, I want a novel to be like, I want it to read sort of like a Russian novel with, like, high drama and cause and effect.
Oh, wow.
And, like, I don't know, I want it to feel like that. To me is like what a novel, it doesn't have to be, like, obviously it doesn't have to be, but that, like, that's the connections and the cause and effect and sort of the story arc is very important to me when I'm reading. And not to say that I don't enjoy, like, prose for prose's sake and, like, good, you know, like, clever thoughts and things.
Don't give them license,
like,
though, to prose for prose's sake. Don't give them
I know.
license.
Well, I mean, you should, it's good that you haven't read my books. Because that's if you talk about prose for prose's sake. But no, I think, like, I I think that is sort of a problem, is people trying to fit into a specific box, and therefore like the work is not as good as it might have been if they had the liberty to just make it shorter or make it formless or make it, you know, whatever else it is, and then you slap on stories or a novel, and then it almost takes away, because like if it doesn't meet the expectation of what that type of writing looks like, people are like, oh, well, this isn't working, when
Right.
in reality it's just working as what it is.
And you lose your contract too.
So yeah.
You lose your contract like that too. Like, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. As a follow-up to what you were saying, how do you know when you have a novel? Like how did you know? Like you've written 3 novels now. How did you know that you had something that was tangible and concrete?
I mean, it's been different every time, but with the second 2, which is when I felt like I knew what I was doing, the first one I had no idea what I was doing, and I just flailed around for a while trying to figure out sort of how to make this like a cohesive, full thing. But for the second 2, I knew early on what sort of the arc of it would look like, and not even necessarily like this is what's going to happen, but like this is the way the book is going to feel at all points in time. And it's sort of, I knew, I don't know. It's a good question. I think also I'm just more of a long form writer. Like I think that the moments, like I really admire a short story where, and I noticed this in both of your work, where like you end it almost like at the beginning of the like story, or like the chronology. Like you have one where the characters are like, they, you know, the story ends where they're face to face, like they're behind the doors, and the story ends where they're face to face. And I feel like you've got some too, where like the short story ends where sort of like the act of living almost would start, and I admire that so much, because I feel like that's what a short story should be, is like you're sort of encapsulating this little moment, and then you're sort of you're like giving it to us to figure out what it is, you know? And in a novel, that's just not, you don't do that. You give it all, you know? And I feel like I am not good at finding those little moments, so I admire people who are able to do it.
That's interesting. I didn't think of it.
I actually think about it in a different way than that, which is to say, a short story for me is the number of pages it takes for me to unravel a question that I've been thinking about for a long time. And if it just takes me 20 pages to do that, then it's a short story for me. And if it takes longer, it's a novel.
So
Do you
you'll
feel
go-
like you've
oh, I'm
answered
sorry.
the question, though? You finish writing the story, and you're like, I
I
know
hope
this
so.
now?
I hope
Yeah.
I hope some.
No, for you,
yeah,
though, for like on a
Yeah.
personal level.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and I guess a novel is that, too, just in like a much larger
Yeah.
form. Yeah.
I've always thought that people who write novels or novelists, and especially ones who have a lot, I don't want to use the wrong word, so pardon me if I do, but you depend more on the character driving, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
As opposed
Yeah,
to,
I think so.
I look at a lot of the shorter forms, a situation is usually more important than, say, a specific individual. And I find myself combining those two, and I guess that's why
That's why it's a novel.
Yeah, that's
in
why it's
quote-unquote
a certain way.
stories.
Yeah. So I always see most of the novelists that I've looked up to or admired, I've always thought that the character, you get this character, he comes up, and you kind of follow him along the way. And whatever, along the way that it deviates or moves, that kind of becomes the book. And as opposed to someone's story, it's usually about some arc, and that arc, it determines pretty much what we have. And you said it's about a question a lot of times for you. I need to have those questions then.
I'm sure you had them.
No, my writing never has to do with a question I have. That statement that you made kind of is probably going to make me look at it a little bit more, because I think a lot of the stuff that I've written about, I didn't have any questions about it, because I don't put my own perspective in. I tend to back up. I don't, Go ahead, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that it's not a question that I'm posing for the world. It's a question I'm interested in exploring for myself.
Yeah.
And an answer that I've been seeking.
Yeah.
And I'm using art as a way to get to the other end of the tunnel.
I can dig it.
Yeah, no, I feel I definitely when I think about sort of like the early stages of novel writing, I think that's also where it starts, is like, what is this ineffable, like, what is this feeling, or what is this thing, or why do people do this, or, you know, things like that, and then it just, you fill it in from there.
Well, it's just no, I respect it. It's just a totally different way. I've never looked at it that way, and so, I mean, maybe it will give me some more stuff. You know?
I want to backtrack a little bit and ask you about. So you start with character. So where does the impulse to tell this story, or you know, how did you begin writing?
Oh wow, I was a.
Like, what made you think that this is a story I need to tell? Like, where
never-
did that impulse come from?
It usually doesn't come until I'm already doing it. There's usually some person, and I can't see them yet. You know, I can't really see what they look like or who they are. So I just try to listen as closely as I can, and I just try to follow that. I don't really do a lot of, you know, I just try to follow it. Because I've never written about my experience. I probably wouldn't, because I'm not interesting. So, well, it's the truth. But so a lot of the times I'm following something that the character. It's very. It's almost like I think it's almost like stage work for me. You know, where I'm trying, like, where they're acting it out a lot of the time, as opposed to trying to just do a narrative, and you know, a lot of the times it's just strictly built on this person is for lack of a better phrase, talking to you, and you're kind of just trying to keep it going and understand as much of it as you can. But it's not anything that I'm really curious about most of the time.
So it's really coming from this desire to at least lead another life on the page.
No, because the lives that I talk about, I would never want to lead.
Okay.
To understand another
Just to
life, maybe?
understand.
Maybe it could be maybe, you know, trying to expound on it or trying to get some kind of understanding. But I guess a lot of the characters and actors and movers in my work, I feel I do understand, because I know some version of that person. You know, so it doesn't really give me a lot of confusion a lot of the time. And I don't really find myself tapping them on the shoulder like, what's this or what's that?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
What about for you, Julia?
So all of my books have an element of like the speculative in it, and I think that is the thing I'm trying to understand, almost like as a metaphor for something larger that I don't understand. Like, my first book is sort of about like the binary of sort of like the sexualized young woman and like dangerous, like the angel devil almost aspect of like female puberty. And so in that book, the girl can kill and revive with the touch of her skin. Like, everything she touches dies. And so I was just trying to talk about, and I guess like this is where it is like a question of like, what does that mean to be a young woman in the world when like half the time you're put up on a pedestal and the other half of the time you're like burned as a witch, you know, like what, you know, you can't, those are the two things you can be, and like what does that mean and how does that impact and why? And then my second book is about a new mother who thinks she's being haunted by the ghost of Margaret Wise Brown, who's the author of Goodnight Moon, the children's book. And that was very much a like, you know, postpartum mental health and sort of what is new parenthood, I guess, is the question there. And like how does one continue their own life while also caring for a newborn? And then this book, my most recent one, is about one is a musician. I mean, it's sort of about like class in that one. It's about two girls, one who's an orphan violinist who is at this conservatory, sort of boarding school, church school, based on a real school that Vivaldi, the composer, composed for and taught at in the early 18th century. and then there's another girl who sort of comes in, and it's about the power dynamics there and sort of like artistic ambition. And yeah, so I don't even know where the question started because I feel like I've just given a career rundown over here. But I think the point being, yeah, so in that one, the supernatural element is there's like a creature that they're sacrificing things to in the canals in order to like get what they want, whether it's, you know, like a good marriage or to be better at their music or whatever else it is. And so it's sort of about like how far do you go to please yourself when there are other people in the world to consider, I guess. So yeah, I think it's like those questions. And then when I've challenged myself with my third book too, I was like, I'm just going to do it straight. I'm not going to have anything magic or speculative or anything. Because again, it puts you in a difficult situation, marketing and genre-wise. So it's like, I'm not going to do it. And it just like creeps in. And that's what drives
Are you just really just
the
drawn to
book.
it though?
So I'm not even, I think that it's, when I am writing something straight, I feel like what I want to say, I can say it through having something surreal or speculative in a way that I like can't tell quite the same story and access like quite the same emotion without it. But they're not like, it's like not a fantasy novel. Like, you know, I think that this is again where like publishing and marketing really can come and shoot you in the foot, because it's like, well, what shelf do we put it on? Do we put it on literary fiction? Is it historical fiction? Is it fantasy? And it's like not really any of those. So
Well, they've all blended pretty well
so
now, though. So,
yeah, they have, but not. In some ways they have, and in other ways they haven't. And I think it sort of depends on how they're going to market it. But once they decide, again, like this is a novel in stories, this is a fantasy novel, this is whatever it is, it sort of like puts you in a position where like people are coming at your work interpreting it a certain way already, when what you meant was like, I just wanted to talk about the feeling. I didn't want to have to explain the entire, like, you know, people are like, well, this is not a fantasy novel. Like, yeah, you're right, it's not, you know? So,
yeah.
But I think you probably get that no matter what you're doing. I don't know.
I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that you're using just speculative space as a way to get at these questions that are maybe underlying in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't always start with questions either, and sometimes the questions I find myself thinking.
But you have that too. If they're the first story in your collection where there's like a bus bathroom where people go and then they just disappear, like that's speculative.
Yeah.
I am so remiss because I had not read your work, and I'm sick of you guys saying, "Well, I read that." I want to apologize. I really do, because when I asked the people, the suits, what was going to happen up here, you know, I would have been prepared. And so I'm sitting here, and I feel bad that I did not, and I want to apologize to you guys in front of everyone, because...
No worries.
Fine.
No, it's
No,
fine.
we're busy
Don't worry
people.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I still want that on record, because this is some bullshit. You know? So, yeah, okay. Well,
We can talk about other stuff.
No,
you know.
I'm with you. I just
Yeah.
wanted you both to know that you have my sincerest respect.
Thank you.
Sincerest. So, yeah.
Do we want to talk about writing process? Or?
I can talk about that one.
Okay. So do you write by hand or by computer? You know.
Everything.
Everything.
I use every single form. Okay. When I start, it's longhand. I got a little notebook. You get a little college rule notebook. And I usually do maybe 4 or 5 pages, just something to get warmed up, something to get you going. And when I feel like I have, what do I want to say? A setting. That usually does it for me so if I was going to write something about this room, once I feel like I've lined up those seats in that row where he is or they are, then now I can go and I go to the tablet. But because the tablet allows me to not have to look at numbers, you don't have to see page count, you don't have to see typos, and then I just go to town from there. And then after I do that, and to the point of where I'm not doing anything anymore, I'm just looking at it, then I go to a real computer, and then now I'm gonna have to work. and that's pretty much it for me. It sounds a little bit more complex than it is. It's messy.
What do you do?
I used to do this. I'm in the middle of switching my process. So my old process was for all my short stories, I would I wouldn't write my second sentence until I was happy with my first sentence. So it's like it became this process of really cumbersome process of iteration. But the advantage of that was by the time I was done, the story with the first draft, I knew it was all pretty close to being the final draft.
Yeah.
But
if you're that meticulous, I would think that your first or second drafts, you pretty much don't do too much different to it.
So,
Right.
But then do you know where you're going when you start then, yes? Or,
not always. Sometimes it's the thing, right? I mean,
because
you
then
go
you
back and then,
throw away all of those perfectly polished sentences though, if it doesn't serve where you end up. Like, do you, or is that not?
I think
is that
the-
more of a novel thing? Maybe.
I think in that older approach, it's partly inspired by the Gordon Lish approach of like wanting to hear the sound of your sentences and then sort of using that as a way to find your path forward into the story.
Have you written poetry before?
I have not.
Do you
You
want
should
to?
try. Yeah.
Oh, it's not just me, right?
No, I was
you
like,
want
this,
to?
this feels very much like a poet's approach
Like
to.
you sure you don't want to write poetry?
I don't know about that. I don't think I'm a poet.
I thought I was pretty anal about the sentences, man. You sound like you just really calculate. I would never get anything done if I stopped on the
So
first
exactly,
sentence.
which is why I stopped doing it. Like I figured there's no way I can do that now with a novel because the short story at least I could work on it for several months and then it's
Right.
still containable in the sense that
Right,
in
right.
15, 20 pages you'll be done.
Right, sure.
Whereas with a novel I don't have that same luxury anymore. So I'm like now writing longhand.
You're looking at this novel as a novel as opposed to let me
Right,
just write
exactly.
it out.
Yeah. So
You
I'm
better throw that out of your head.
right now it's been hard, but I'm now writing without looking back, which is such a radical
You
departure
have
for
to.
me.
Yeah, you absolutely have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll never.
It'll never,
Yeah. I mean, I think that I was lucky or unlucky enough to learn early on not to polish because with my first book, I wrote probably like 100 pages in the wrong direction and then had to like totally cut and go back. And then from then on out, I was like,
That
I'm
was a
just
tough
not
day.
gonna. Yeah, but ultimately, I mean, is it better to like write a bad book that nobody reads because you spent a lot of time on it, or like write
But what about
the
all
right
these bad
thing,
books that people
you
are
know?
reading?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I didn't want
What
to do one
about
of those.
those?
No, but I do think like there is something to moving forward and then figuring things out as you go and then going back and having that sort of second draft be the one where you want the sentences each to be perfect, but then and like, oh, this character ultimately ends up here, so here's a little clue, or here's a little like a nod to something that if someone wants to read your book 7 times, maybe they'd ultimately pick it up, but like that I as a writer take a lot of pleasure in those little sort
So
of
you
moments.
outline and things like
No,
that?
I don't really outline. I sort of have like a driving force, and I sort of know like semi what the next scene is and like the
Okay.
feeling of the end.
Okay.
But I don't really outline. But then once it's all written, I can go back and know like, oh, this little diversion was not. It doesn't ultimately pay off, and I can cut this, or I need to add something here that sort of explains something at the end in a way that I think when I also was sort of polishing each individual sentence, it is just so much harder to then be like, this does not serve the project as a whole. And I think that's, again, how you end up maybe with books that are not as good as they could be, even if they're beautifully written.
That's fair, because you can have the most beautiful prose in the galaxy, and
Right.
if you're not moving along,
Yeah.
you'll lose somebody. What do you get, 10 sentences out of that? Nishanth, what do you think you get out of that? I mean, you probably could get 10 sentences, right? Like a first paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs of just beautiful writing before somebody goes, okay, what the hell's happening? Like, does anything? Because it turns off after a while.
Right.
Like, you get used to the writers. You can read Toni Morrison, but if it don't get to nothing,
Yeah.
it don't get to nothing.
You have to have both, yeah,
You know,
just to
you
balance.
You have to have both.
You
Yeah.
have to have both. I think a lot of people that claim to say they're influenced with her, by her, grab that part, but forget that there's a level of
Yeah.
character development there too, and other things.
Well, she
that go
also,
with-
she starts with such a, like, I feel like everything that she writes, like, starts so firmly rooted in a particular character
Yeah,
or
sure,
story or
sure.
situation
Yeah.
that she
Sure.
can,
Sure.
yeah.
I think it's time for audience questions.
If
If anybody has a question, please come up to the mic. And in the meantime, I'll get us started. We have several questions coming in from our virtual viewers. So thanks, virtual viewers. First one is from Sandy. You're three very different writers, but you're all Chicagoans. Jasmine, you wrote a book set in Chicago, but for all three of you, does being a Chicagoan influence your writing?
Sure. This is a really hard question for me to answer because as an immigrant, Chicago is where I became a writer and all of that, but I'm not particularly attached to Chicago in the same way I might be attached to the place where I grew up. And as a person too, I think I've been growing more and more philosophical, and I see. I mean, hypothetically speaking, I mean, if I hadn't moved to Chicago, if I'd moved to New York or even Washington D.C. or any other city, what would have changed? It's just another city. I feel like city is just a scaffolding for memory, a place for people to have common reference points. I mean, I think Calvino said it, right? Cities are memories. So that's my sort of broader take. But going one level down, Chicago, I mean, the particularities of Chicago, there's a lot that I admire and have learned from and have inevitably made it sort of, some of it made its way into my book. I wrote a story set at the Chicago Tribune where I worked. So yeah, I'm in that sense, I'm very much a Chicago writer.
Me. Chicago is everything in my work. It is everything. I think the city is as big of a character for me as anything else that would be in anything that I write. I don't think I would ever write about any other place. I am so in love with the history that I so resent of this place and the way it's affected people that look like me that I could never, I actually think I would be cheating or insulting some people, or even just, for lack of a better word, being pussy if I would have wrote it any other way. It has to be in Chicago for me, and it has to be firmly entrenched in the neighborhoods of the city, of the people that I talk about. And I have to try to take the reader through those cities. That's the part I feel like I control the most, the scenery and things of that sort. So it's everything for me. And I wish I could do what you did. I wish I could do where you can kind of look at it from that distance, man. The Sears Tower is always, I still call it Sears Tower. It's right in my face all the time, So, yeah, we are opposite on that one.
Yeah, I think my experience is somewhat in between the two of you, because I've lived in Chicago for 14 years now, but I also feel like the place that I feel I know, which is funny because I left when I was 18, is like where I grew up, but I know it as a child, and the place I know as an adult is Chicago, and yet it still feels slightly foreign, but my kids are Chicagoans,
right.
And they were born here and they live here, and that I feel like ties me to the city in a way that I didn't necessarily feel beforehand. But I also think something that Chicago has shown me is like how different. I mean, this city is like 100 different cities in one, and there's like the political history, and there's, like housing, and there's neighborhoods, and there's all different kinds of things. So I think that in certain ways, there are definitely things, I mean, not necessarily my most recent book, which is set in 18th century Venice, but I think like in terms of, like my second book is set primarily in like Chicago, and there are ways that it's absorbed. And it also is, I mean, it's a great city to live in, even if it's not showing up in your work. I think it's a city that encourages artists, and it's a good place to be an artist.
Sure.
And so I think that aspect of being a Chicago writer is very important.
Yeah.
Okay, we got another one from YouTube. This is from Michael. Nishanth, this is your first book. Can you talk a bit about the experience of being a first-time author? Also, as an immigrant, what does your family and friends in India think of the book?
They haven't read it yet. The book comes out August 11th in India, so there's a few more weeks before they get to it. My dad has read it. He's one of my first readers, and he's always sort of been very supportive. As to the other question about being a first-time writer, as in first-time author, it's very surreal, just the experience of putting a book out in the world. It feels like I've just divulged a world that I've been carrying with me for a long time, and now it's open, and it's not technically mine anymore. And part of my journey has been learning to let go of that. I think Jhumpa Lahiri calls, I think I heard her call in an interview of her books as like dead children. I wouldn't go that far, but it's I have this fondness for it, for the book that I've written, but it's a distant fondness. Does that?
It makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would be surprised if Jhumpa Lahiri would call that one that she won a Pulitzer for a dead kid. It turned her into a superstar overnight. So, hey, so I don't know.
I think this kind of goes along with the last question a little bit. Reggie asks, what advice do you all three have for other aspiring authors who may be watching?
I'll take that one. When I first began writing, I knew what I wanted to write about. I knew the questions that were animating me. I knew the stories I wanted to tell, but I was not very good at craft, and I was learning craft. I was reading and taking workshops and whatnot. I think the craft is attainable. You can get it. It just takes practice. I think the harder part is the commitment to your own ideal of what art should look like, and being steadfast about that.
I'm no optimist on this one. If you do everything else in your life that you want to do before you try to be a writer, to do everything you possibly can that you think you might want to do, and if you circle back to it and it's still there, be ready, because it's hard, and that's after you're published. That's after you're published. It is a very difficult life. It's a very difficult thing to do. It has its rewards if it's truly who you are. It has its rewards, but it will prove to you that it's who you are or not. Because to Nishanth's point, you craft, you can study, you can learn a lot of things, but when you have to dedicate yourself to it, and that's a different beast right there, and if I could go back, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't, but I'm here, so let's go. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would still do it, I think. But yeah, I think, no, that it's about priorities. Like, if there are other things, no one is going to sit with, behind over your shoulder being like, have you written this yet?
Yeah.
Write this. Like, you have to have that inner motivation to sit down and do it and finish. And I think the finishing is, like, a lot of people have the idea and can sit down and start, but you have to then show up. Like, I'm not someone who says you have to write every single day or else you're not a writer, or you have to do it, but you have to show up for it, in ways that mean sacrificing other aspects of your life. And so you have to be willing to do that. And I also think my advice is, like, reading widely. I think that a lot of people get stuck reading sort of one specific type of book or in a specific genre or a writer, but I think, like, the more that you can broaden just the types of things you're reading, even if it feels like something you never would have thought you would enjoy, like, I think you learn different things from all different types of books.
Can I add something to that?
Go for it.
That statement is absolutely perfect, because the people that have influenced me do not match in any way, shape, or form. Steinbeck, Donald Goins, Sandra Cisneros, Sherman Alexie, they do not share anything. And it's because of what you said. It's just reading widely. I was stealing from all of them, though, you know, just stealing everything I could. And
That's how you make your own thing, is you like a little from this, a little from that.
So that's the greatest statement. Read widely. It's everything you can.
I was just wondering who your like beta readers are. Who do you hand over your first drafts to, and like how gentle or brutal do you want them to be when you hand over that draft you worked on for 7 years?
For the first reader for me is usually my wife or my dad. Yeah, they're pretty harsh with me usually, but after that, I'll send it to my MFA friends, and by that point, because I'm somebody who used to draft in a certain fashion, I never really wanted to hear any criticism, because I thought, oh, if I heard a point of criticism, I was like, damn, I didn't do it right. But then I think over the years I've sort of used my friends, and I really trust them. If I'm unable to sort of put a finger on what exactly is wrong with the draft, I can trust my friends to tell me that, and I know I'll listen to them. So having a group of dedicated readers who actually know to call you on your bullshit, I think it's really important. Yeah.
But I also think it's important. I mean, I also have over the years accumulated sort of a little writing group. But I think when you're first starting out, it's very difficult. Like, I really only found people who I trusted with my work to that level after I'd already published 2 books, I think, because it's hard. It's just hard to find the right person. Like, it's not about how many people read it. It's about having like the right person read it, who understands what you're trying to do and is going to give you feedback in accordance with what you're trying to do, not like what they think you should do or what they think the book is. And so I think like once you find that person or that set of people, it suddenly like is very natural. But I do think it's like a hard process to find that right reader, or the person who, you know, is going to be open and reading like what you're doing and not what they've like imposed onto it. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. Yeah. I guess I am lucky in that way. I have somebody who I guess I'm gonna keep. I guess they probably would want to stay anonymous. So let me just. But they will kick me in the teeth. They will, you know, praise me. They get who I'm about and what the stuff is supposed to be. And so, in fact, there have been moments where they got stuff that I didn't know was supposed to be. And so, and that was the moment where you learn that you trust them, you know. I'm very selfish with it. I do not share. I don't let anyone read. I don't even share a page, a sentence, because I'm always afraid that that'll be the page that I'll want to discard or something like that. I don't. I'm really protective, but I do agree you do have to have somebody, and you have a few people, but somebody that will, more so than praise you, tell you what, you know, as you said, call you out on your shit, you know, because that's the most important thing, because that's what's going to come up later, you know.
What was the most difficult part about writing a book?
For me, there are 11 stories in my book. So 10 of them are actually in my thesis, my MFA thesis. And by the time I had put together my thesis, I thought, this is a book, I have a book. And my thesis advisor read it, and then he said, it's missing a mother-son story. And he said that, and a few months before he said that, my own mother died. And so I realized, the moment my advisor said that, I realized he was right. That I was sort of, the whole collection was sort of missing that space. And for 2 years, I tried to write that missing piece. I wrote like 60 different drafts I would write 5 pages, 6 pages, and throw it away because nothing felt tangible. Nothing felt like it could actually survive. Words were very fragile, and I thought my life as a writer was over, that I would never actually finish the book. And in the process of like making peace with that, I sort of gave up on working on that story, and instead I tried to write another story that seemed more friendly and had like less pressure. So I was trying to have fun, basically, and in the process of doing that, it turned out that, you know, it had the bit of that mother element that I was actually trying to write about, and the minute I wrote that story, I knew I would be able to finish the book, and in 2 months after that, I sold the book.
Beautiful, beautiful. The question was, what's the hardest thing about writing it? Wow, that's so many things. The hardest thing about it is, I think maybe I'll have to really jump up. Is when you realize you actually have one. I think early in, it took me a long time before I even thought that was possible, because I never wanted to continue. And then somehow I just kept writing stuff, and I'm looking at it now like I don't know how that makes sense, and it sounds like it doesn't make sense even to me, but it happened that way. And then one day, I moved away from Chicago, trying to get away from writing again. And when I came back, that was 2012 or 13. I committed to it. Like there was just this commitment, and I think that's the first time I thought I had a book, but I hadn't written but maybe 3 of the that were even in there at the time. A lot of it wasn't even in there, and then so I started the process of just trying to see if there was really something there, and that was the hardest thing, trying to figure out if there is a book or is there really a whole picture to this or something of that sort, because you don't even realize it, in my opinion, until you're done. You know, like, oh, I have a book. What did you think you were doing with all these pages? You know, so that's probably for me the hardest part.
Yeah, I think each project has its own specific individual challenges, but generally structure has been difficult, especially because 2 of my 3 have sort of like differing, like the point of view changes and like where the story is coming from, and one of them has like a dissertation worked in and a variety of like different things, and trying to figure out like where all of the pieces fit and what the most like cohesive best way to put them together. I think for the first 2 was very frustrating and difficult.
Do you feel experienced?
Do I what?
Do you
I
feel experienced?
I mean, technically, I guess I am, but it doesn't. The issue is that if I could write those particular books now, but I can't necessarily write whatever comes next. You know,
because you don't ever really get to a point where you feel comfortable, do you?
I don't think you ever get, just because in order to be, for me at least, in order for it to be interesting, it has to be different enough from what I've already done. And that means that the challenges are going to be different from the things I've already figured out. So like, there's definitely aspects of it, and I think I know when it's not working sooner than I used to.
Yeah, sure.
But that doesn't mean that I know how to make it work. Like, it still requires that same sort of difficulties and discovery that it did the first time.
That's hard. Yeah.
So, came up here with one question and discovered another. And I guess maybe it's fitting because it's the end. What brings you all joy in your writing? Not necessarily the process or what you've written, but you all have talked a lot and laughed about some of the difficulties in the process, and all but turned new writers off and said, maybe I don't want to do this, or maybe I should just rethink it. But what brings you joy as a writer?
I mean, for me, I think there's a moment that you just feel like you've tapped into, it's like you're riding the wave almost, when you're saying what you're trying to say, and it is coming easily, and you feel proud of it, and you feel like you've like found something, and you're communicating something that, you know, especially in a novel, like I think those moments can be few and far between, but when you like harness it, it's really, really great, and you feel sort of
You feel alive.
you feel alive, and you
Yeah.
feel sort of seen, and you feel like you're showing someone else what it is to be alive, and in a specific moment and place, and something that you're doing, and that's the best part of it, I think, is when you are writing, like drafting, and you hit those.
For me, it's the joy that I get out of it has nothing to do with the writing. It's after, and I've only gotten joy after I was published. I did a lecture or whatever at Gwendolyn Brooks School, and it was the greatest day of my life. But the reason why was because it was the first time that I saw, you know, looking at younger people, that my work had actually mattered to someone. Genuinely, because, you know, kids don't do too much lying to you. You know, they're not going to do it. And I had them, they asked me questions that I begged people that I cared about to ask me. They were so into it. And it kind of kicked my ass a little bit because you guys kind of got a beat on me. I kind of got a little resentment going on. And it kind of slapped me. Like, dude, get over it. You know what I mean? And that is the only real, I guess I would say, joy that I've experienced. And it was enough. It was enough. It was enough to make me say, okay, this is what you do. Fine. It was enough.
That's amazing.
It's true. It's true.
Other than the joy of writing a good sentence, or tapping into that the space, like Julia was saying, for me, I get this really incredible burst of joy when I'm able to answer a question for myself, like when I get to the bottom of things. Like, for instance, like I have this story about an old man and his granddaughter, and the old man sort of dying, and the granddaughter is sort of like she's looking for ways to live with that potential loss that she knows is coming her way. So it feels like a question that I've been living with for a while, and I'm not saying I have answers for those fundamental human questions, but it's about how does one make meaning in those impossible life situations. And if I'm able to get to a vantage point from which I can appreciate the life around me better, I'll take that, and it's incredibly sort of fulfilling to get to those places.
Yeah. There's something almost therapeutic about it when you hit that,
Okay, one final question, and that is, what are you reading now or lately that you would recommend to our audiences?
Well, I just read 2 books. What have I read recently? I literally just the past week sort of spent time in both of your books, and it was really great. So I would definitely recommend both of these. And then I also, I'm blanking. I always blank at this. It's funny because everywhere you go, they ask this question, and I always totally blank. Okay, there's a book coming out in, I think, September, called People Collide by a writer named Isle McElroy, and their first book came out a few years ago. It's called The Atmospherians, and is also wonderful. But this book is about a husband and wife, sort of a Freaky Friday husband and wife body swap book, and it's very funny, and it's very sort of poignant, and just beautifully written. And so that's out, I think, in the next few months. People Collide by Isle McElroy.
I don't read much when I'm in the process of composing, but I do read a specific person for kind of to have a kind of uncle-y figure over my head, and that's James Baldwin. I actually reread for the 3rd time in the past 2 months. Stranger in the Village is one of his essays. The essay is about when he was living. I think it was either it was some country in Europe where they hadn't seen a black person, and when I read him, the reason that I read him in the process when I'm composing is because he keeps me out of my own selfish nonsense. You know, because I always see the vantage point of what they went through. You know, these guys that we're reading were still taken as this unrealistic luxury. And so, yeah, I'm mostly reading his essays. They have them all compiled in the library in a book this thick now.
Was that country Greenland by any chance?
I don't think so. I wanted, it wasn't like Ireland or it was some Western European country he was in, because he was living in a friend's mom's chalet, and they let him have it, and he was like, it was like, you know, some rural pastoral kind of place where they hadn't seen a black person.
Switzerland, maybe?
It was somewhere up
I
there.
just name
It
a
was
country.
somewhere up there. And it's funny, to your point, I'm blanking on it, and I just
Yeah,
looked
like,
at it
where
this
would they
morning.
not?
But the whole point of it is that I read him a lot when I'm composing, because he makes me get over myself, and it's easy to do, but he does it fast. So yeah.
I'm having a bit of a Kazuo Ishiguro summer. I'm rereading Never Let Me Go. I read it multiple times before. I'm reading it again because it's been a while. Read When We Were Orphans like a couple of weeks before that. And then I'm going to go read Unconsole next. So an Ishiguro summer.
Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today, but I want to remind you all that all three of these wonderful authors have their works available at your Chicago Public Library, so please take a look at that on your local library branch shelves, or put a hold and read all the books. Books are available for sale in the lobby, and if you want to go purchase a book, the authors will sign books here in just a few minutes. Thank you all so much for coming, and please visit our website for other author events coming up very soon. Please join me in giving them another round of applause.